Hey everybody, thanks for downloading this episode of the Agile Wire. We have Pawel Mysliwiec, who is another professional Scrum trainer with Scrum.org and is one of the course stewards for the Professional Scrum Master course to chat with us. We've mentioned the course stewards a few times now on the show, last time with the Professional Scrum Product Owner steward, Don, but we wanted to give a little bit more information on them in general. Each of the courses that Scrum.org offers is maintained by a small group of people, generally 2 to 3 individuals, that are the course stewards. While there are just about 300 PSTs worldwide that contribute ideas to the courses, it is the job of the stewards to cultivate and keep the courses up to date. Scrum.org rotates the stewards every few years in order to make sure they don't become stagnant and bring opportunities to others to take up the mantle. So getting the chance to pick their brains on things is always a good time. Anyway, enjoy the episode.
Welcome to the Agile Wire, where professional Scrum trainers Jeff Bubolz and Jeff Maleski discuss Agile topics. Now, here are your hosts, Jeff Bubolz and Jeff Maleski.
And we are recording. All right, Jeff, kick us off, man.
All right, so we have Pawel Mysliwiec here tonight. So Pawel, you just got back from Australia, and we were just chatting the other day and thought it'd be great to have you on and talk about all the great things that you're working on. And but before we started talking about some leadership challenges that you've been seeing with some of the teams you're coaching. Do you want to dive into that? That's one of the topics that we really love here on the Agile Wire.
So funny thing you brought the Australia stuff. One of the sessions I ran at this face-to-face with, especially with Mia Horrigan and Matt Hodgson from Canberra, was around leadership in the digital world. There is a notion of accelerated reality we're living in ever since the technology skyrockets and globalization is kicking in. Like for the past 10, 15, 20 years, human ability to cope with change is much lower than the speed at which the world accelerates around us. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting to study it from a leadership perspective, as leaders are in a unique position where they can help cope with this pace of change, or they can help their teams cope with this pace of change. And in my experience, many leaders are struggling in understanding how they can adapt to the challenges that the digital transformations are bringing to the companies. And I kind of pulled from brains of my Australian folks on this subject. Do they see the same things in Australia? Do they see the same things in New Zealand? And was wondering, do you see these challenges that leaders are facing in traditional organization with the pace of change that people are facing?
Yeah, I think it's everywhere from what I've seen or what I hear. But what were they saying in Australia and New Zealand when you were talking to them there?
Well, two interesting things. Matt has brought the syndrome of learned helplessness, which is one way to cope with this pace, which basically humans are like, so whatever, I'm going just to learn how to stay here and passively wait for my retirement and try not to do any harm around me, which is basically you face the change by doing, it's too fast for me, it's time to move on. The other syndrome I've been seeing a lot, and they confirm that it's also quite frequent in their companies, is some sort of overreaction, where people, by trying to deal with this change, they enter reorg frenzy, doing new departments, changing teams, shifting focus, which is kind of overreacting because they try to grasp any opportunities to see what change is helpful. And it doesn't bring much help to teams when they face overreactive leaders, because it creates most often chaos more often than otherwise, which is two major patterns, not necessarily helpful to teams. I wonder whether you are seeing this type of situations in your companies, in the ones that you're coaching.
What can you give a little bit more of what you mean by overreactive leaders?
Okay. Let's say I'm a manager in a big financial service company. My teams are moving to Agile, whatever that means in their jargon. They create basically Scrum teams. Scrum teams start to challenge management. They start to promote self-organization. They start to promote collaborative work, co-located product teams, and managers often in organizations I've been coaching, let's say in financial services or in government, they are feeling that things are slipping out of their control in terms of what the role is. And in some companies, especially in big ones, financial service oriented, I see managers entering into multiple discussions on how to best organize the department, how to best structure the PMO, how to best structure our reporting structure so that product teams can get support. And if this is not working, they try to reorganize into some other type of teams. The teams of teams, they bring SAFe to get more help. So I see this kind of overreacting frenzy, I call it, where people not necessarily knowing how to help teams, they enter into some sort of testing what is the best process for our teams. And people on the ground, from what I'm hearing, is they're asking themselves, are our leaders kind of knowing what they are doing? What is this new jargon they bring in? What is the new reporting structure? What are these new metrics we're trying to measure?
Mhm.
How is it helping us? That's what I call overacting frenzy. I'm wondering whether it's just a fact that is very popular in big organizations where managers are left aside, not coached necessarily by Scrum Masters and Agile coaches, or is it something that you see in even other organizations, smaller ones?
Go ahead, Jeff. I'll let you take this one.
So I was curious about it because I don't know if I've necessarily run into that. What I was thinking of when you were talking through all of that was more around big batch delivery, where we just want to there's often the analogy of like, okay, well, should we just tear the Band-Aid off and do all the things all at the same time, or should we kind of eat our own dog food and do small batches? Like, hey, let's run an experiment. Let's put together one cross-functional team and see how that goes, and slowly build up over time. But then we've got the cost of delay, essentially, of not doing something that's more of a big bang release. And then the other thing, I was writing it down as you were talking about it. But that I guess the other topic that you bring up, which was interesting, was the learned helplessness. And I wish I could remember what the book was that talked about that. But when I remember reading it and thinking like, what an interesting topic. And so I don't talk about it as learned helplessness, but the man, even I'm kind of blanking here. If you've ever saw the video that talks about like the 5 monkeys, the science experiment where they put the bananas at the top, and every time a monkey tried, they spray them down. So that to me was the learned helplessness, and I just talk about or articulate that as institutionalized behavior, where the teams have just learned not to step outside of these boundary areas because the organization has taught them whenever they do, they're going to get their hands smacked, and over time they forget that why those boundaries were put in place, but they just know not to go and do those other things. But I guess I'm not seeing the same thing that you're seeing with the overreacted leaders portion.
So I just want to clarify one quick thing, just so people, if they haven't heard the monkey example. So they spray the monkeys down with the banana there, and then eventually they replace all the monkeys that got sprayed down with a monkey that hasn't ever been sprayed down, and one by one. And as the monkeys just like go up and try to get the banana, all the other monkeys like beat them so they don't get sprayed. And so eventually there's not a monkey in the cage that's ever been sprayed, but they just won't go after the banana because they've learned that, you get beat up if you do that.
I'll link to the video,
Okay.
which will be a much more amusing thing for people to watch than our butchering of what it was.
It's a great experiment. I think that it's called conditional operating in psychology, where you basically condition monkeys that they are going to get beaten if they reproduce a behavior, and then progressively the culture takes the advantage of the conditional operating psychology side of stuff. But yeah, linking the video might be better than us bringing concepts like this.
So I think that in organizations, they're generally optimized to manage people. So they're aligned around specialties, they're aligned around departments, they're aligned around systems. They're generally not aligned around delivering value to customers because that's really hard to manage. So they don't do that. Now, I think general management of people is a commodity skill set these days, and that's not the thing we need to be optimizing for. Value and frequent value to your customers is the most important way to be aligned. And if you structure your organization that way, a culture around value delivery will follow. But if you hope to try to change behaviors without changing any kind of structure, it's going to get diluted, and the structure is going to overpower that eventually, because that's just a stronger tie than any kind of behavior or coaching changing you're going to have without that. So I do see managers switching or trying to change up the org chart from time to time. You can see that in a lot of big organizations, but I don't see people really ever aligning around value. And I think that's the big, or around customers. Like, those would be things that I'd be talking about with organizations. And so I'm just wondering, like, is that kind of where you're going, Pawel?
So this is definitely an interesting point, as many times the struggle I see is with people mostly on the IT side, people managers managing, let's say, I'm the manager of analysts, manager of QAs. This is where I see this type of challenges. I don't see it as much when we talk with business stakeholders. Business stakeholders are much more aware of managing around value. They measure this type of OKRs very often. They often have business cases built around them. However, there is a disconnect between, on one side of the company, we measure mostly process efficiency, and we manage mostly people by functional role, and we kind of measure this KPIs like number of bugs detected versus number of bugs solved, planned versus actual. And on the other hand, the business is measuring the business outcome. We pay attention to our analytics, we pay attention to our customers. So many companies struggle aligning these both sides of the story around a more value stream type oriented thinking. And when we address only one portion of the company, which is the IT side, with less connection to the business, we miss the opportunity to align on the right things and find the structure that follows. This is to tie back to what you were saying. If we structure part of the organization around processes, KPIs, and functions, and on the other side of the organization we struggle to deliver value, there may be a mismatch between these two value streams.
Yeah, that's actually, Jeff and I have just been doing a lot of talking around this topic with EBM, and really just kind of like those two silos of an organization, right? Like, you've got IT and then you've got the business. And in each side of those, or each area of the organization, they kind of focus on different types of metrics. And I like when, or the way EBM articulates that is, while we certainly want to be have I guess bias maybe is the right word for this, towards value metrics, that's not to say that delivery metrics aren't important to us. Like, if all we care about is value, but we're not taking into account things like cycle time or lead time or defect count or anything like that, those things are going to come up and bite us if we're not having some type of visibility into that. And there should be this kind of natural, actually, I was going to say tug of war between those two sides, but I would say just an equilibrium of balance between them, because as we give focus to one side, it's going to allow the others to start to bubble up. And then we want to go back and maybe pay down technical debt, which means we're going to have less to do to value. So we want to find some natural balance between those two, but also understand that at different times we may need to sacrifice one side of that equation for the other, but without ever really losing holistically the big picture of how the organization is doing at delivering value to customers.
Yeah, it's more about having, balanced metrics around capabilities and value, and then making choices to expand your capabilities so you can have more speed or more capacity to deliver value in the future, or to when to focus on more on value. Like, there's times for both, and you should just be making informed decisions on what you want when you want it. And that's what we keep telling people to do. And we break it down into like these leading and lagging indicators, and trying to think about it as a scoreboard. We've used this analogy a couple times on the podcast, but like the player scoreboard versus a coach's scoreboard. So a leading indicator is the player scoreboard. You know the score, you know the time left, you know the quarter, you know what's happening and what you need to do as a player. And as a coach, you might care about all these whole 100 list of stats that come out, and that might help you predict what you could do or what play might work next. But as a player playing the game, you don't care about that. Like, you just need to play the game, and you can't focus on all those things at one time. So those are things that we've been helping teams with recently is how do we set up those EBM metrics, and what's right for one team isn't right for another team. It really depends on the area of the organization you're in, what your product is, to figure that out, and even your maturity. So like anything in Scrum, what we found is the best way to do it is just to get started. Like, pick one from each of the categories and just like, okay, now you've got to start. Now pick another one. And what else makes sense in this situation? How else could we get thrown out of balance? And making conscious decisions on output and outcome type metrics that would be leading and lagging indicators, because you want to use a little bit of both.
I like your analogy. I'm going to steal it. I like stealing things from people, and it's a great analogy. I steal a lot of analogies from sport because it's very easy for people to relate to sport. When we teach concepts that are far from the people's reality, bringing examples from sports is a thing I like a lot. So for EBM, it's very nice way to represent the difference between leading and lagging. And I also like how evidence-based has evolved to highlight these two different portions of EBM and to see how this circle works. Have you seen how it's being presented in the last material, our leadership material, or in the last few presentations that Patricia has brought around the subject about how this virtuous circle is working?
Yeah, so I'm going to stick my foot in my mouth here because I don't know exactly who the core stewards are. I want to say it's Mark and Ravi.
Wojtek.
Okay. So when I was down at the last face-to-face, Ravi had spent, so Patricia stepped through some information with EBM, just kind of giving an overview of it. But then Ravi actually did a really great kind of a feedback session around just his experiences. He said, I think it was like maybe 3 or 4 different organizations that he had talked through. Like, here was what had happened. Here was the impact that came of it. Here was my lessons learned from it. And I again, kind of paraphrasing a lot of what he had said, if I recall correctly, was the thing about where, and this is probably just in general with coaching now that I'm thinking about it out loud, but the higher he was able to get into the organization and the more buy-in he was able to get from executive leadership, the more impact that he had for EBM in particular. But like I said, I think that can probably be true for just about any coaching in general. The higher level that you can get in and get ownership, likely the more impact you're going to have at an organization.
Interesting things with these metrics is that they can give you a level field of discussion with different people from different parts of the organization. While part of the organization focuses mostly on capability metrics on the lower side, which is basically the time to market on one hand and the ability to innovate, the business side cares more about current value and unrealized value, which is the disconnect I see is that these people don't necessarily talk to each other, and they often optimize locally their metrics. Yep. While taking the holistic view around the notion of the product, for instance, where we understand each other, that we are working on both sides of the same product, you can have much better conversation about what makes sense for the Scrum team to work on right now, because you understand this circle and you understand how these metrics influence each other. And this is the thing I like about EBM.
I was going to quick add on because I like plus oneing you. So like just jamming the button right here to give you plus ones to what you're saying. I think there's just this natural bias for wherever you come from in the organization. So if you're coming from IT, you just have a natural bias towards the IT focused metrics. If you're coming from the business, you have that. And then where the rubber hits the road though, is you can kind of tell where, so I'm thinking of teams with product owners who come from the business versus teams with product owners who come from IT. And while I think it's great that the whole team knows and has this vision of all of these metrics, in particular, I want a product owner who comes from the business partly so they know the business, but also so that they have that vision of value right away coming into it. Because I certainly we can coach and bring them along to that, but if they're coming to the table already having value focus, they kind of have the natural counterbalance to that with the development team saying, "Hey, but we've got to think about these delivery type metrics as well, right?" But if you've got a product owner who came from just IT, then you're already too weighted towards the IT focused metrics and not being able to properly balance that out with the value metrics that we want those product owners looking at.
Jeff, on your side, any experience, any challenges you see bringing evidence-based management to the table?
So I've been working with a few teams using it. Where I think it can be really powerful is at a sprint review. And so oftentimes, people come in and they think of a sprint review more as just a demo, or I'm just going to see this working product. And that's great. That's a big part of it. But, we go back to the Scrum Guide, like those bottom 3 bullets in the sprint review, where it's like the entire group collaborates on what to do next. The review how the marketplace and potential use of the product might have changed and what's the most valuable thing to do next. Review timelines, budgets, potential capabilities in the marketplace, and next anticipated release and functionality and capabilities of the product. I mean, what better thing to use than EBM and looking at those balance metrics to say, hey, here's where we are, here's where things are going, here's what we're trending for in the future. Let's use that to help us make some conscious decisions, thinking about the capabilities in the business environment that we're currently in right now, and what's the best thing to do from a holistic standpoint. So I see that being really valuable. I have got some resistance to sharing some of the financial metrics. I'm wondering if you've seen that same resistance.
Well, resistance. Usually people are scared about how this is going to be used against them, in my experience. That's a main challenge I see from both sides of the story, both business people and IT people. Sometimes there is this organizational culture. If I show too much of my hand, how it's going to be used against me. Well, if I'm in a coaching position, let's say as like a Scrum Master to the Scrum team, or like an Agile coach on another level, I like to bring just the basic Scrum values about respect, openness, courage.
Mhm.
We are all in this together. It's a safe environment. Maybe there has been challenges in the past. So how can we build a safe environment in which we can share with each other these metrics? We're playing for the same team. We are all in the same organization. We are all playing with the same product. Some of us are more technical background. Some of us are more business-oriented background. But if we play on the same team, we still want to satisfy the same user, same customer. So how about we share with each other what's relevant? Transparency doesn't mean that we say everything to each other. It means that we use relevant data that can help us make better decisions, both in terms of the value we bring to the customer and in terms of how we solution it on the technical side, how we build it. This is just a level playing field where we understand that we are in the boat together. It's not just we versus them or us versus them. It's mostly how can we satisfy both the business and the customer. I don't know if it makes sense. It's just basic for me. It's amazing how Scrum values are helpful on many levels.
Yeah, what I see in practice is that smaller organizations, let's just say 100 or less, much more willing to share financial data with the teams. But once you start getting to a certain size, there's a little bit, maybe it's a loss of trust. I'm not exactly sure what it is, but there's a lot of apprehension to share financial data with frontline employees that are actually doing the work. I'm not exactly sure why that is, but like I think that they can handle it. I think that's one of those things that when you're in a startup, everybody's aware of where you're at and what you need to do and how you drive value, and it gives you a sense of urgency and ownership, and you really understand what actions provide value and which actions don't, because you get to see that lagging indicator and of like the financials of what's actually happening. But without that like knowledge, I think that that's one way to get disconnected from what you're actually delivering.
So is it a common pattern, or maybe are we trying to coach people into building too much trust too fast? I don't know. It's maybe a few metrics at a time. I've seen analytics, for instance, being a good starting point. Usage rate, maybe starting with adoption rate, churn rate. Here's the reality of our customer, even without going into financials, just to build trust, just to help understand each other with some metrics. And then when we learn to trust each other better, maybe bringing more financials around it, it looks like we need to rebuild this trust. Maybe it's a one step at a time, one metric at a time. It's
Yeah. Yeah, I've even coached product owners that like don't have the financials to be like, okay, well, what do you think the team costs? Let's say we got 8 people, they're all making with fully loaded salaries X amount. That means our sprint costs $40,000. Okay, now what if you say ballpark our sprint we think costs $40,000? Rough estimate. Did you get $40,000 worth of value out of what we delivered here in this sprint? And asking your stakeholders that, maybe even asking users if they're buying your product, like, is what we delivered to you worth that? Those are good questions to ask. You don't even have to have the real numbers, but like, I guess thinking about it in that way, it does, I think, make a difference. And so I agree with you. Like those other metrics can be great, but it's really hard for people to put a sense of like value and what it, and in most cases, value comes down to the 3 things. It's either money, customer delight, or like social good. And for most for-profit organizations, it is going to be money. And so not talking about money seems like a really hard thing when that's really what we're ultimately optimizing for in a for-profit company.
So you both were bringing up an interesting thing in here about building trust, and I kind of like to take a step back and just kind of like, do we have to focus on building trust because we've just done so much bad stuff that has degraded trust? I just think of like, if I'm a new employee entering into an organization, like there's got to be a base level of trust coming in the door, right? Like I've chosen, geez, even in this job, especially in this type of job market, where I'm going to elect to leave where I'm at to come to this new job because it's better, it's financially better, it's got a better culture, blah blah blah. But then so much of what we are doing and talking about is, okay, well, how do we rebuild trust? Well, somewhere between the day we entered a company and someday in the future, like what was all the bad stuff that happened that tore down trust between us, that we now have to reinvest so much time and effort into rebuilding it to get some sort of outcome that we're going for?
it's a very interesting subject. I like what you're bringing. When we come to a new company, we don't come at gunpoint to join the
Right, right.
company. We are coming because we are trusting that this company will help us realize ourselves. We are trusting that this is going to be a place where we are going to be valued as individuals, where we are going to bring value to customer. So it's interesting how sometimes these high aspirations can wind up in some companies, and learned unhelplessness is something that is definitely one of the elements. When you bring a new idea, let's say you think you're a valued individual. It happened a lot in my past experience where I feel that there is a problem that needs to be solving. I highlight it and I get the answer, well, it's always done this way. just
Mm-hmm.
this is the workaround, don't bring it unless you have a better idea. Which you get it, you get this answer once, you get this answer twice. At one point you're going to learn that bringing new ideas is not valuable here because it always got done this way. This is one way how you can kind of, I wouldn't say kill creativity, but at least diminish it in new employees.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Any other examples from your real life how this drive
Yeah, what I've seen, I've worked with a number of mid-sized organizations, and you talk to some of the people that were like some of the first 20 or 30 people in the organization, and they're like, well, when we started, we didn't have any of these policies or rules around this stuff. But as we grew, we started to have them. So there was this one situation where somebody did X. And so we never wanted that to happen again. So we created a couple policies around that so it would never happen again. And we'd ask, I poke a little bit on that and nudge a little bit and be like, well, Is the problem that we just don't want to have uncomfortable conversations where there's conflict, or and handle those, on a one-on-one basis? So we just create a policy so we don't actually have to have those conversations, or is it, or is there a real need for that? And I think a lot of times it's just policies are constraining, and they take the human aspect out of things a lot of times. And then it's really just because people don't want to deal with conflict. And if people could handle conflict better, or maybe they had a framework that helped them with that, or maybe they had a way to do that, they wouldn't have to create a policy for everything. I think that there's a big difference between policies and constraints. Like constraints on self-organization, saying like, hey, WIP limits, we're going to do WIP limits within our sprint backlog so that we have work in smaller batch sizes, because we know that's going to lead to more stuff getting delivered, higher throughputs, and lower cycle times. That's a good constraint to use within your team. But a policy saying that everybody needs to, I don't know, get 5 approvals to take a day of vacation, because one time somebody took a vacation and we didn't have coverage, that's probably not so good. Let's just hold the team accountable to that, So those are the things that I see in organizations. And I think that there's a big difference between policies and constraints, and that you should think about those in your organization and why you have what you have.
So can I completely change the topic?
Sure.
On you too?
Oh,
Yeah.
it was a fun topic, and you completely change it.
Well, so I actually want to take us back to what we were talking about earlier, because selfishly, I really want to hear your 2 thoughts on what we had kind of started out talking about, which was leadership and the manager to leader transition. And so, partly because I always beat Jeff up on this a little bit, because I have been a manager, and I know that manager is almost like a dirty word to a lot of people. And regardless of what we call that word, I still think there's a place for not just leadership, but people development. I think we as PSTs often take for granted that I think we're cut from a different cloth. And not to sound arrogant when I say that, but I think we're highly motivated individuals. Like the bar to becoming a PST is rather high, and it's a long, hard journey to get there. And so those that just don't have that drive don't usually make it in, or I should say, ever make it in. But where I'm going with that is, I think we know how to continually improve ourselves. That's just part of our mindset and part of our being. Like, we know where we want to go. We know how to plot out a pathway to get to that point. But that in and of itself is a skill set that not a lot of people have or are even aware of as something they need to do. So where I want to go with this conversation is, okay, if we're moving away from managers, and to me, part of managing people in a positive perspective is to help build them up, is to help see where they're at today and help them get to where they want to be a year from now, because not everybody has that skill set yet or has developed that over time. So what, in addition to that sort of people growth skill set that I would be looking for from leaders to bring to teams, what are the other things that you 2 would want to help educate leaders, managers, directors, executives in organizations today? Like, what are the other things that you would want to talk to?
One class I love delivering recently is the PAL-E. PAL-E, which Professional Agile Leadership Essentials. I had a chance to deliver it a few times already, and this class is quite brilliant in some aspects. It's not perfect product, but it's a product that is very, very nice to tackle these challenges. And I like what you brought is some coaches I'm working with seem to say that manager is a dirty word. Like, we don't want to use the M word. Everyone should be servant leader. You should forget your management stuff. And it's not as black or white when we bring it in a class. I like, for instance, the Wilbur integral model we bring in the class, which is making us aware of, are we mostly concentrating ourselves on the leadership stuff and forgetting about management, which can lead into like a hippie hugging community. I like Simon Rindle's reference to it. He often says that sometimes people forget themselves as agile coaches, and they fall into this pattern about we love ourselves, we are a great, amazing team, and let everyone self-organize, let everyone do whatever they want. And it doesn't bring any value. There is no cohesion, no coherence, and
it's just chaos at that point.
It's just chaos. Everyone likes hugging ourselves, and we are a great community together. So this is the one extreme of the equation, the leadership extreme. On the other hand, there is management extreme, which is basically I'm going to tell you what to do. I'm going to verify everything. I'm going to let you very little place to maneuver. You just execute your mindless resource, and I'm going to utilize you. Which is the kind of extreme that many of us maybe have lived in our past experience, which is maybe why people are bringing to the table this reluctance to see this extreme management. Maybe some of us have lived poorly in this type of world, and we try to make it a better place by moving to the side of leadership. So what I like to bring as a conversation in the Pawel E-class is that you cannot really go one extreme or the other. Extreme management lowers creativity, lowers self-organization, maybe brings value to very little and creates disengagement. On the other hand, extreme leadership can be chaos when you forget that you are still there to manage some value and to help people progress. So what is this middle ground? How can we be leaders without forgetting management part?
So I think that's interesting because I think you can be on the extremes, and context definitely matters. Like if I have a very immature system with immature development team, scrum master, product owner, and I'm a manager and I go ahead and I try to lead at that highest level and I'm trying to give them all the autonomy and let them self-organize over everything, it's going to be chaos like you guys were just talking about, right? But if I lead at a very much tighter guardrails and a lot more tighter shared goals and a little bit more focus and help bring the team's overall maturity up to that next level and then up again, eventually I can start letting go into wider and wider guardrails. And then eventually I can lead at that right level. Now, likewise, if this whole system gets very mature and that leader leaves and all of a sudden a new leader comes in and they go and they try to lead at that, like, I'm going to control everything in super tight guardrails, that's going to probably piss a lot of people off and they're not going to be very happy. And they're going to be very frustrated. And so I think it can go both ways. And I think the thing that it comes down to from a leader or a manager is leading at the right level and knowing what the maturity of the people within your system are. And hopefully you can work towards a point where you're more that, we like to use that gardener analogy. You're helping people grow and get better. You're also helping to protect the system and protect the culture that you've kind of like built everybody up to. And that's a hard thing too, because you do a lot of that with the hiring, firing if you have to, or just like what you allow to be okay, what kind of conflicts is allowed, like what, when people cross the line, what happens, and do you address it or do you just let it slide? All those types of things are all things I think that a leader or a manager should address. And leaders aren't always managers, and managers aren't always leaders, but they can be.
So I feel like the manager example is easier to understand, but what are some tactical things or more concrete examples of what you would say are examples of good leadership from that scale, right? From manager to leader. Do you have any more concrete examples for me that I could take away?
I like the system approach that Jeff is bringing. It's adapting to the right level, your management versus leader scale, understanding the level of maturity of your system, understanding where you would like the system to grow in terms of maturity, and a very concrete practice I've been using a lot, even before it became a thing, to some extent, was delegation poker.
Mm-hmm.
It's something I used a lot with, let's say, a previous client, 2 years at this public sector government body, with most of the managers being just managers, not understanding a thing about leadership, and agile teams growing in their demand for autonomy. So bringing the discussion to these managers and helping them identify different decisions they need to make, the level of compliance they need to abide by, and bringing also the team to the table, maybe a few people from the team, not to scare the manager at all, at least having a discussion between the product owner and this manager, maybe an architect on the team and this manager, of here are this discussion I need to make. Here are the decisions I need to make. What is my level of confidence that I can delegate this decision to you? And starting very small, maybe I'm here to sell you my decision first. Maybe I'm here to listen to you and I'm still deciding. And identifying, clarifying with the delegation poker practice that, as far as I'm concerned, Management 3.0 was the one to popularize this practice by Jürgen Appelo. Maybe it existed before, but Jürgen is good at coining things. So Management 3.0 brings this type of practices into how making collaboration not a chaos, but a more constraint-driven system, to your reference that you brought, Jeff, before, constraint versus policy. Let's identify the constraint on the decision and let's delegate and see what happens. And I'm here to coach you. I'm here to see whether this level of delegation is appropriate. And I try to move higher into delegation over time as my system matures. Any other ideas, Jeff, on the top of this one?
Which one?
It's a tricky thing to say, Jeff, where you're two Jeffs. You should change names for the podcast.
Just be like thing one and thing two.
Here's another thing to think about. So I heard these stats the other day that in the US, there's a ratio on average of 1 manager to 4.5 workers in organizations. And that's a real cost. Trillions and trillions of dollars are spent every year in management. And is all of that, like, do you need all of that? Or could we get by with a 1 to 9 or something bigger ratio? And I think it's possible, especially now if you're using Scrum or some form of agility where you have somebody who's like a product owner who's directing the work and ordering the work and talking about value and representing that customer value to the customers. And you have someone else doing protecting the culture and the constraints within the organization and helping to grow people and be more of that coach. I think that number can be much higher than it has been in the past. And there's this new book coming out that I'm super excited to read by Gary Hamel. It's called Humanocracy. And in some of the things that's kind of leaked out, he's talking about there being a BMI, and he talks that as the bureaucracy mass index. And so how much bureaucracy is within your organization? And there's a true cost to that. So shareholders, board of directors, they should care about that because there's a big cost to that in your organization. And so I think that he says this too, that like the only sustainable competitive advantage is your organizational structure and culture that you can create. Like there's a reason why no one took the car companies, 20 plus years and they still haven't copied Toyota's, Toyota production system. And they've been researching it. They've been working collaboratively with them, but they can't quite figure that out. Right. So like, that's a really hard thing to copy. And I think that there's innovation around the corner. And I think that Agile's kind of starts you down that direction of like, well, what is possible? And how can we innovate in that space? What are your thoughts on that?
I feel like that's grossly oversimplifying it. So like, what do you, well, okay. So let me back up for a second. So the counterpoint to that, I'm also reading, what is it? Extreme Ownership. It's Jocko's book, Jocko Willink. And he talks a bit about this in there. And with the military background that I come in with is, right in line, like you're never in charge of more than 4 to 6 people at a time. But the Army's definition of a leader and what you're responsible for doing is probably a little bit different than what the financial sector thinks of for leadership. So I guess where I'm challenging you on this one, Jeff, is again, this goes back to what do you expect from your leaders? Like, what are all the things that they're supposed to be capable of doing? Are they also individual contributors? Are they doing nothing but management? Are they, like, is there administrative stuff that they're doing? What are their, what all goes into that? Because I think it's a very broad stroke to just say, I think you could be in charge of 20 people and it shouldn't be an issue. Versus I think you should only be in charge of 4 to 6 people. So I think context is kind of key in that.
Yep.
And same thing with a lot of what we've been talking about. Just because it works over here in this area for this organization in this context doesn't mean we're just going to copy and paste that over to here and we're going to have the same output or the same outcome, excuse me.
That organization or that the system that you're within, that maturity level makes a big difference, right? Like if you're that level 1 maturity, probably need a much tighter manager to employee ratio. But I think as you build out self-organization, as the team can handle more of those responsibilities, things that the manager used to do kind of start getting owned by the team, by the product owner, by the scrum master. Maybe you don't even need some of the things that were there before because the guardrails are wide enough and they self-regulate each other. I think that it depends on the system. I completely agree with you, but I think that you can get to a point where it's much higher than what the average is today. So I think in a very mature system, 1 to 4.5 is probably not the right answer. And you should think about where you're at, because I'm thinking like what I would rather see is a product owner being more like a CEO of a product. They have complete ownership of the P&L, the budget. Also, they want to work with a vendor. They might say to a manager, hey, I don't have time to go out and interview a bunch of vendors and look at these constraints. Here's my guardrails. Can you go figure some of this stuff out and bring something back? We'll decide together. And the manager might go out and do that for them. Or they might go and say, the team's telling me we need a couple of new developers. We need these skill sets. Can you at least funnel the list down? We got 100 applicants sitting in the pool. Like, can you get it down to something and then bring it to the team and let them figure out how to hire? Or, we have 3 spots open, let them figure out who to do it. And the manager maybe, or the product owner maybe doesn't, they approve it. The manager maybe like helps filter that down and guide that process from an HR perspective. But maybe the team makes the decision. So there's like, they're not the single point of failure, and they're not, that's not like a huge, responsibility maybe that they have, in the future.
All right, so let me give you one last pushback, and then I'm going to shut up so Pawel can chime in on this. What if I just change the role from manager to scrum master and said, but in a super mature organization, our scrum masters can work with 20 different teams?
Pawel, do you wanna answer that one, or you want me to answer? I'll answer it. I'll get an answer, but I feel like I've been talking too much.
Jeff fighting.
I
like the idea of Jeff's fighting in their own podcast.
Yeah, I know. I'm talking way too much. So.
Okay. So the thing that I was listening is understanding the role of manager, understanding the role of leader may seem different in different contexts, in different organizations, different industries, different settings. And I like the thing that Jeff M is bringing, that and maybe we're talking mostly about Navy SEALs, maybe we're talking mostly about highly operating SWAT teams, where there is this ratio of it's a small cross-functional team with a leader that needs to make important decisions in a chaos environment. And the style of leadership you adopt in chaos environment is much different than the style of leadership you may adopt in complex environment. If we go back to our roots, kin and fin with Dave Snowden, leader's role is in a more stable environment might be much more limited than the one chaotic environment. Mm-hmm. So in Army, it may make sense to have a leader that's highly decisionary, like maybe the CEO in the early stages of a product development, that needs to make important decisions, and having more than X people on the team may not be doable from this perspective. So I tend to go back to the roots like Stacy, like Kinefin, because often we try to apply the same recipe regardless of the sector, regardless of our product, regardless of our setting. And going back to the Navy situation or Army situation, we are often more in chaos. We don't know what will happen on the field. So having a very big team and one leader on the top of it may not be manageable, simply, may not be effective. So this is kind of,
or it might, and you might need to just experiment. Like, I think that it can go either way, is what I'm saying, and I think that the context absolutely matters. What do you think about that?
You may have noticed I haven't answered the initial question, the initial pushback question. I'm kind of good at dodging questions, but want to be transparent about this one. So Scrum Master for 20 teams. Why is it something that it's, let's say we go back to our sport references. Would you have one professional coach to support 20 professional teams and try to make the best out of the teams, try to coach them the best?
No, and that's kind of where I was coming from with this. And I like nudging Jeff on this because this is one of the few areas that we don't agree on, and this adds good conversation. But like, why is it different for a manager? Why would we trust that a manager is going to work and be able to set up 20 different people? But oh, wait, when we're going to talk about the Scrum Master role, no, we need to lower that down and make sure that's only 4 or whatever the arbitrary number is.
Highlighting the cost of bureaucracy is interesting to sparkle the discussions about value, about cost of things. And I don't shy away from this. My personal best index that I like to use is the index of people thinking, talking about work, planning work, discussing work, reporting on work versus people doing the work. And it's even more scary than manager versus subordinates. This one is almost 1-to-1 if we are very happy. People doing the work versus people talking about the work. So this is just to highlight how sometimes the job is maybe not as effective and not as valuable in how it is executed. Doesn't mean that the person doing the job is not valuable. Doesn't mean that the intentions are wrong. But just highlighting, are we just busy or are we delivering value? Now, I do agree, back to your point about how some people need some help to be more progressing in terms of their career, in terms of their building their skill set, that in some environments, some people need some help. And managers are great to help them by coaching, by facilitating their career discussions, by giving them some feedback on a closer basis than once a year, of course, hopefully. So it can create this environment where people start to kind of believe in themselves. And I was very happy to have a manager in my career that has started this one-on-one discussions on a periodic basis that I was feeling comfortable with. And he was the one to propose, well, you can come in every day if you want. I'm here. Or you can come in every week or every 2 weeks. I'm going to give you the feedback on the recurring rate. I'm going to help you identify opportunities for yourself. And I didn't feel like I was micromanaged by this control freak. It was one of the best managers I had in my career.
Yeah, feedback's a gift, right?
Yeah. And what I liked about this manager, it wasn't one size fits all. He was very aware of people different need for feedback, people different needs in the stage of their career. I was willing to have a feedback every week, and some other people were I'm okay with 2 months. I'm fine, and he wasn't pushing. So it's all about the respect of our boundaries, all about the respect of where we are in our life, and maybe challenging us. Maybe if he was feeling that the feedback was not frequent enough, maybe he would ask me, how about 6 weeks? I know I hear you are comfortable with 2 months. Could we try 6 weeks and see what's happening, or are you not comfortable of doing it? I like this about manager, more like a coaching stance to some extent to my personal development. And he had a huge impact before I even became an agile aficionado in my career, early in my career.
Yeah, what I like about the way that the stances that manager took was very much meet you where you were, or meet people where they were, and not push them. That pushed them into the traditional manager role. Like, we're just going to go through the motions here, and I'm going to tell you what to do or how to do it. Like, it sounds like very much of a growth mindset, or growth, like, how can I help you grow attitude. So I really like that. That's cool. Jeff, are you okay? I'm going to answer your question now, Jeff. So, can a Scrum Master manage 20 people? I would say yes, in context, just like a manager can. So, if the team, can they be a Scrum Master for 20 people on 2 teams? Sure. If the teams are very mature and they don't need a lot of help from the Scrum Master, maybe there's one product owner, one product, and so they can serve that product owner and that product and that organization well, while still having 20 people that are within that scaling system. I think that's very possible. Now, could that same 20 people be split across 4 different teams and 4 different products and be brand new to Scrum, and that just be completely ridiculous to ask of a Scrum Master? Of course, it could fall into that realm as well, but context matters.
Yeah, I guess I keep pushing you on this because, of course, I'll agree with you. It could, but then I'd ask you, well, cool, how many Scrum Masters have you met that you would feel comfortable saying, yeah, 4 teams is a good number for that Scrum Master to work with?
Yeah, generally not 4 teams. 4 is too many.
Okay, so that's kind of what I'm getting at is, yes, it's in the realm of possible. Of course, I'll agree with you, but it's not as likely. Anyway, I feel like we beat this one, and so I just wanted to nudge you on it a little bit.
I like nudging. It's nice nudging. It's you like to nudge yourself on this issue. I guess it's not the first podcast you're beating this horse.
No, this is fun because too often I feel like Jeff and I, like, we're almost in an echo chamber with things, and so it's nice when I get to disagree with Jeff, especially with another person here to ping ideas off of. So I wanted to selfishly take advantage of this opportunity.
Can I have an opportunity to nudge you back on one thing?
Yeah, go for it, man.
Okay, have you read the John Cotter's Accelerate?
Man,
on change
is
management?
that
Yes.
On change management in the accelerated environment.
Mm-hmm.
He brings the idea of a dual operating system. It goes back to the fact that, and you mentioned it a little bit in your conversation, Jeff B. Trying to make it more personal. When the companies grow, they go from a quite organic, almost beautiful era where the innovation sparks, where there is one visionary, maybe with some friends and people gravitating around them, where ideas are sparkling. We build products. It's lean startup all over again, and people are drinking Kool-Aid. They're playing foosball, and they release beautiful software into production at one point. And this is a nice era in many companies, and all the companies who are grown up right now have had this era in their past.
Mm-hmm.
And then company starts to grow. The product matures. We have released it. We need some more stability. We need some more revenue. We need to work closely with vendors, with representatives on the field. And we start to build a management type of system to manage this stability for profitability. And this system is quite small in the beginning. In the beginning, it's still full innovative because the culture is still there. But some management comes in with processes to grow the company, to make it stable, to make it relevant. Analysts from the market are asking us for figures. So we need to bring more financial reporting, which pisses off some visionaries, but still it's necessary. So we hire managers. And the operating system starts to grow in terms of more management-oriented structure next to the innovation structure.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a period of growth that Kotter calls a golden age in his book, which is basically where you still have this innovative structure and you have some management structure that makes the company grow in a sustainable way with mature products. If you look at Spotify, for instance, it's basically when the videos were taken in 2011, 2012 with Kniberg, with Frederick Van still present, before the culture a little bit collapsed to the management side of the things. Because with growth, often management gets bigger. People on the innovative side start to lose interest because it's mostly business as usual. So it's no longer more space to innovation. and then structure gets even bigger. And Kotter says that this is like a natural way of companies to grow, where structure takes over innovation. And what he proposes in the book is a way to crystallize the period where innovation and structure live hand in hand.
Mm-hmm.
Could we crystallize it? Could we make it an operating model where the company could grow and keep this innovative spirit? And he brings a few ways to make it real, to operationalize it. And it first time I read it, it challenged me, because I'm the one I'm the one person in favor of not having hybrid models. Like, when people are bringing this waterfall on one hand and Scrum on the other hand, and try to mix and match to have a perfect process. However, on the organizational level, you have places where innovation is required and you have places where stability is required. So how can we make these both worlds work? And what is the manager/leader role in it? How can we, on one hand, be supportive of innovation, make it relevant, make it aligned with companies' objective, and let autonomy and liberty and creativity to people who are willing to invest their time? And on the other hand, how can we have a more mature side of the organization with roles, responsibilities, with reporting system, with P&Ls, with all the structure that maintains growth and stability? So just a food for thought. Have you ever been in a company that has been in this glorious golden age that Kotter describes, where on one hand you have effective innovation, growth, visionary, still very happy to work with in this side of the story, and you have effective product management for mature products and growth of the company?
I would say, yeah. There was a company that I was with that was right in that sweet spot of like 100 to 120 people. Like everybody was really great at their job, producing value, lots of cool things happening. And then, just like you kind of talked about, there was some stuff had happened that got to more of the process, more of the, we need to be a big company now, kind of things that happen that you kind of change that. So I definitely have seen that. So I think there's something to be said for having a structured system like that, or maybe a more typical, it's like a hierarchical pyramid type structure, right? Like that's one way. Or there can be distributed systems. They also have strengths, and how can you leverage those strengths but still leverage the strengths of a traditional hierarchy and still have alignment? So what's the goal? I guess I would go back to, what's your goal of adding extra bureaucracy? Is it to get alignment around a common vision and to focus on the higher level goals? And if that's the case, are there other ways that we can do that, that don't add additional bureaucracy tax to the organization? I think that there are, and I think that different companies out there are experimenting with it. There's companies like Bubolz, I think, is the one that's the nursing organization that's in Europe, and they've got like tens of thousands of nurses and just a handful of managers, and they are working small cross-functional teams that provide service to like a certain area, but they manage their own area, their own P&L. Like it's just them, right? I think Morningstar is another one. Gore-Tex is another one, right? These companies have been written about for a while, and there's not a lot of companies copying them. I think it can be done. It's just different in every context, and it takes the right people and the right system to figure out what's going to work for you. It's not a copy and paste every single place.
So it kind of drives back to this fact that trying to implement perfect practices rarely works.
Yep.
I guess you may already have had this type of conversation in podcasts, like we have this idea that we are going to implement this framework and everything will be fine. And it's just food for thought. We get our food for thought from many different places. I feel it's like building our sources, building our experience by experimenting things. That's how we discover things. We may read interesting stuff. It's like continuous learning mindset that that is helping us as coaches, us as trainers, I guess, and maybe it can help organizations also.
Yeah, I think so. We're saying that that there aren't best practices in the complex space, and that we need to have emerging practices and take our context into consideration, right, as we're kind of moving forward. And if we keep certain principles in mind, that can be a great thing. But know that you can't just copy and paste from one organization to the next. I think that's a good place. I think that's a great way to end the podcast. So, like, with that, Pawel, is there anything you want to plug? Like, are you speaking anywhere? Getting conferences coming up? Any blogs that people could check out, or any way that people can connect with you?
Plugs. Okay, Scrum.org asked me to do a Ask Me Anything session. That's a thing that Scrum.org has been running. I think Ryan Ripley was the one who initiated it, because he has this type of Ask Me Anything conference where he basically comes on stage and he says, ask me anything, he builds the backlog. So I'm going to do it in 2 weeks' time on December 11. And that's been highly popular. I'm looking forward to it. Basically, people throwing questions on me and trying to figure out what's the best to answer, trying not to fall into the expert pattern. Otherwise than that, just teaching a lot, moving around. As a PSM class steward, I try to bring the most out of the class material. I know it's the oldest class, maybe the most legacy product we have. So how can we get this class to the level that's still relevant? How can we leverage what we have, our credibility, and maybe bring more training from the back of the room? So always very interested hearing input from other trainers that can help us, me, Stephanie, and Simon, improve this class material and make it still relevant to teach. So these are my main plugs, I guess. I can bring the conversation, and I was very happy to chat with you guys.
Yeah.
So maybe we can do it again around some beer, some wine at face to face, or even recording for posterity.
That'd be great. Well, thanks for joining. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for listening to the Agile Wire. We are consistently inspecting and adapting ourselves. We would appreciate feedback at feedback@theagilewire.com or on iTunes, Spotify, or Google Play Store. See you next time.